Star Wars is a universe packed full of absurdly powerful corporations, many of them cartoonishly evil. In the films, this is most prominent in the prequel era, the story of which is dominated by the abuses of the Trade Federation and its allies, who aligned themselves with the Confederacy of Independent Systems. In the Imperial era, the expanded universe tells us the stories of similarly powerful corporations that were given a free hand by the Empire, allowed to engage in all manner of horrific abuses. But the most evil corporation in Star Wars, and perhaps even in all of science fiction, would be most well known to fans of the Old Republic era. We're talking, of course, about Czerka Arms, once known simply as the Czerka Corporation, which we'll be discussing in depth today.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The history of Czerka Corporation was long, much longer than most of the Star Wars galaxy's other corporations. While the Trade Federation was less than 3 centuries old at the time of the Clone Wars, Czerka had thousands of years of pure bastardry to its name. And though it was less powerful in the modern era than it had been previously, it was every bit as unscrupulous as it had always been. Its evil deeds ranged from the banal, bureaucratic sorts that slowly crushed the life out of the galaxy to straight-up slavery and genocide, all done in the name of ever greater profits for Czerka's soulless executives. The company itself was quite good at avoiding legal accountability for its actions, and it was internally structured so that no one individual within the corporation was responsible for all its atrocities. The evil of Czerka was systemic, and that system was self-perpetuating, unleashing atrocities upon the galaxy generation after generation, largely of its own accord. The origins of Czerka Corporation aren't entirely clear, but the company was founded at some point during the Old Republic era, possibly sometime around 5000 BBY. It was founded as Czerka Mining and Industrial, but as the company grew, it began branching out into other industries, most notably weapons manufacturing. At some point, it simply became known as the Czerka Corporation, and by the start of the Old Sith Wars in 4000 BBY, it had a hand in virtually every aspect of the galactic economy. And by the start of the Old Sith Wars in 4000 BBY, it had a hand in virtually every aspect of the galactic economy. Its operations spread far across the galaxy, especially in the Outer Rim, where it could easily avoid Republic regulations and establish monopolies on lesser-known frontier worlds. From the beginning, Czerka was a pretty ruthless company. It used whatever tactics necessary, legal or otherwise, to overcome its competitors, and it set out to monopolize whatever it could, wherever it could. To that end, Czerka got in the habit of purchasing exclusive rights to entire planets, either by buying the planets outright or coercing its people into forming exclusive trade deals. By the time of the Old Sith Wars, Czerka had set up operations of one sort or another on roughly half the galaxy's inhabited planets, and it was involved in a dizzying array of trades and industries, most prominently mining and the manufacturing of weapons and droids, but also including pretty much everything else, selling everything from foodstuffs to slaves. Czerka was, after all, quite well known for its opportunism and complete lack of ethics. They were interested in any business arrangement that promised them profit, regardless of who it was with or what it entailed. They not only did business with the Republic, but also with its enemies, and Czerka had exclusive trade agreements with the Hutt Cartel, many independent worlds, and even one of the Sith Empires. This approach allowed Czerka to become the galaxy's biggest monopoly, omnipresent across the galaxy, something acknowledged in the company's motto, "Anytime, anywhere, we're there." Entire sectors of the Outer Rim were essentially owned by Czerka, and these places were subject to Republic law in name only. In truth, the corporation was the only real authority on many worlds across the galaxy, and its authority was absolute. Czerka had billions of employees, and while its business strategies were repulsive, they made Czerka insanely wealthy, and with that wealth came tremendous power. Czerka was the first known corporation to receive representation in the Galactic Senate, which happened sometime during the Old Sith Wars, and the corporation used the political power this afforded to insulate itself and its executives from any and all legal consequences for their actions. Czerka could also be outright cruel, especially its rim-based branches. It routinely enslaved or exterminated the indigenous peoples of planets it laid claim to, and it operated without concern for planetary environments, poisoning worlds, and devastating ecosystems. The company was routinely involved in extortion, bribery, and price gouging, and there were even rumors that Czerka branches had let their own colonists starve to death when they became unable to afford the company's jacked-up prices. The company was especially cruel to those who owed it money, blacklisting them from working in the company and its subsidiaries or purchasing the company's goods, which, due to Czerka monopolies, could completely ruin someone's life. Yortul Ixis, an Ithorian mechanic who lived in Manaan during the Jedi Civil War, was forced into debt by Czerka after he failed to complete a task for a Czerka executive. Following this, the company used their influence to prevent him from finding work as a mechanic anywhere in the galaxy, and as a result, they were able to force him to run a used goods shop in Arto City for them. As you would expect, Czerka treated its employees terribly. The corporation did its absolute best to avoid any and all responsibility if its employees came to harm. On Tatooine, for instance, when Czerka personnel were captured by Sand People, the company's response was usually to just purge all mention of them from official records. Several employees in the KOTOR games attest to the pay and hours both being lousy, even for managers and low-level executives. Czerka employees on Czerka-owned worlds were essentially the property of the company, as the corporation ran settlements like Anchorhead as company towns, where Czerka owned everything and controlled every aspect of its employees' lives. Czerka de facto enslaved some of its employees via debt, to say nothing of the actual slave labor the company used. Around the time of the Galactic Wars, Czerka accepted lifetime employment applications, which was essentially yet another form of slavery. Cruelest of all, Czerka employees were made to wear hideous yellow and black uniforms branded with the company logo. Much like the later Trade Federation, Czerka Corporation also had its own paramilitary force, the Czerka Security Division. Whilst this wasn't a full-scale army like the later Trade Defense Force, the CSD was well equipped due to Czerka's role in the arms trade, and it acted as the sole defense force for Czerka-owned planets. The CSD was most commonly tasked with simple security, but occasionally the company sent them out to suppress or exterminate local populations, assassinate whistleblowers, and intimidate Czerka employees or debtors into cooperating with the company. Czerka was also known to hire large numbers of heavily armed mercenaries, which it used for even more ethically dubious tasks. Czerka used its mercenary armies to give it plausible deniability. Often, the mercenaries they recruited were little more than raiders recruited from backwater worlds to act as thugs for the company, and whenever their activities aroused the attention of the authorities, Czerka would just claim that the mercenaries had gone rogue and were acting of their own accord. In another move to avoid legal trouble, Czerka Corporation's branches were fully regionalized, which meant that if one branch of the company got in trouble, the rest of the company was able to maintain plausible deniability. Local branches of Czerka Corporation operated under regional administrators, such as Janos Verka, who was posted to Kashyyyk, and Jana Lorso, the executive of Czerka's Citadel Station branch. Local branches answered to large regional branches, which in turn answered to the corporation's overall administration, which, during the Old Sith Wars, was led by the notoriously corrupt president Pollard Sirio. Czerka's official headquarters was in the Dreshte spaceport on Korriban, though it also maintained a major representative kiosk on Coruscant, where the bureaucracy of the company seemed to have been handled. Czerka administrators, faced with unpleasant questions, were known for weaseling their way out of answering by telling people to take their questions to the Coruscant Representative Kiosk, even on planets as far from the core as Tatooine. Czerka Corporation reached its peak during the Jedi Civil War, mostly for two reasons. For one, the conflict threw much of the galaxy into chaos, allowing Czerka to expand its monopolies and operate in many places without legal oversight. For another, though Czerka Corporation made trade deals with both sides during the conflict, it had a special arrangement with the Sith Empire. During the Jedi Civil War, as the Sith gained a distinctive advantage over the Republic, Czerka's executives made a deal with Darth Malak. They would supply the Sith Empire's military forces with weapons, and their Korriban headquarters would provide supplies and freight hauling services to the Sith Academy there, and in exchange, they would get exclusive trading rights throughout Sith space. This gave the Czerka a monopoly over the economies of virtually every planet in the Sith Empire, which made them incredible amounts of profit. Czerka used some of this profit to finance the Sith war effort, providing the Sith Empire with supplies, equipment, and sources of natural resources, since the more the Sith conquered, the more planets Czerka gained trade monopolies on. Despite Czerka's open alliance with the Sith, however, the corporation continued to do business within Republic space, and the Republic could do nothing to rein them in or rebuke them for their deal with Malak. Czerka was simply too powerful for the Republic to do anything about their activities, and their monopolies meant that even the Republic was forced to keep doing business with them to maintain a supply of essential goods. Even after the end of the Jedi Civil War, in which Darth Malak was slain and the Sith were ultimately defeated, Czerka never suffered any consequences for its alliance with the Sith. What's more, the Sith Empire, unlike the Republic, didn't even pretend to have an interest in mitigating Czerka's abuses. On neutral or Sith-controlled worlds, the Sith Empire gave Czerka Corporation a free hand to do whatever the frack they wanted, so long as it didn't interfere with Sith military objectives. Thus, it was during the Jedi Civil War that Czerka business practices were at their most unethical, and as Republic authority rapidly diminished, Czerka took the opportunity to carry out extermination campaigns and other atrocities on planets such as Tatooine and Kashyyyk. We'll look at what happened on Tatooine first. Czerka Corporations was one of many companies to discover Tatooine over the years. Between 5000 and 4000 BBY, several expeditions had discovered the planet, settled there, and abandoned their settlements, with records being lost after each attempt. Czerka was only the latest company to fall into this pattern, and its operations on Tatooine met the same fate as those of the previous settlers, though not before Czerka carried out a little bit of genocide. Czerka laid claim to Tatooine as a prospective mining world, as preliminary surveys had shown that the planet was rich in a variety of useful metal ores. To that end, Czerka established a settlement on the planet, the city of Anchorhead. The city was built on the exact same site several previous expeditions had built their settlements, and as such was known as the Old City New to the local Jawas, who began trade with Czerka and the colonists who came to Anchorhead. From Anchorhead, Czerka began a massive mining operation, importing huge sand crawlers to dig up the desert in search of ore. But the mining operation quickly ran into two major problems. Firstly, while Tatooine was indeed rich in metal ores, Czerka soon discovered that Tatooine metal had unusual magnetic properties that caused it to corrode extremely quickly. In the time it took to export off-world, the ore rapidly became completely unusable, leaving Czerka with a mining world that exported nothing but useless junk. Additionally, the mining operation came under attack from the local Sand People tribes, who declared war on the settlers and killed them on sight, especially Czerka's miners and security personnel. The local Sand People chieftain, already disgusted by the off-worlders' haughtiness and irreverence for Tatooine's environment, considered the settlers' arrival an invasion, and Czerka's destruction of the Dune Sea with its unholy machines was seen as a particularly offensive act of war by his tribe. The Sand People responded in kind, defending the lands of their ancestors from the encroachment of the corporation. Both of these problems came together to turn Tatooine into a massive headache for Czerka, a planet-sized money pit that screwed with their operations on a galactic scale. Czerka traders who conned other companies into buying Tatooine metal not only destroyed their own reputations, but that of Czerka itself. And while Czerka tried to cover up the uselessness of Tatooine metal in the hopes of making some profit from the mining operation, word quickly got out. By the end of the Jedi Civil War, nobody was interested in buying metal from Tatooine, and Czerka was left with a completely and irreparably unprofitable mining operation. Czerka kept up the mining for as long as it could, conning what few buyers hadn't already heard of the quality of Tatooine metal into paying them for garbage. But before long, the Anchorhead settlement had to resort to other methods of earning revenue in order to stay afloat. Czerka sponsored the establishment of a Tatooine swoop racing circuit, which was run by Motta the Hutt, and it also brought in hunters from across the galaxy, enticing them to Tatooine with stories of its fearsome krayt dragons. The racers and the hunters kept Angerhead afloat for a little while. The swoop races brought in a small crowd of visitors, and betting on them was profitable both for Czerka and Motta, while the hunters brought in some decent profits selling desert raid bone plates and the occasional krayt dragon pearl. The hunters, swoop racers, and visitors all spent their money in Czerka Corporation stores, which allowed the company to profit off the whole thing. But this didn't last forever. Motta's unorthodox racing standards kept the Tatooine track out of the official swoop circuit, while the large numbers of hunters quickly devastated the populations of several local species. Additionally, the Sand People continued their attacks, which expanded to target the hunters and swoop racers as well as Czerka miners. In response, Czerka Corporation resorted to genocide, hiring hunters to exterminate Sand People tribes so that the attacks would stop. Fortunately for the Sand People, one of the hunters they hired was the amnesiac Jedi Revan, who ended up striking a deal with the local tribe to decrease their attacks. This spared this particular Sand People tribe from Czerka-inflicted genocide, but the intent was still there on Czerka's part, and Tatooine was far from the only planet where Czerka pursued campaigns of extermination against uncooperative indigenous species defending their homes. Sometime after the Jedi Civil War, Czerka Corporation ultimately abandoned Anchorhead, which had proven to be nothing but a giant waste of money on the company's part. Mining operations on Tatooine ended, and Czerka abandoned its sand crawlers in the Dune Sea, where they were commandeered by Jawas tribes. But Czerka still retained ownership of Tatooine for a little while, and it occasionally used the planet for illegal and/or unethical weapons testing in the decades following the Jedi Civil War, taking advantage of Tatooine's lack of Republic oversight. The Czerka Secret Weapons Division carried out numerous unethical experiments on Tatooine before and during the Galactic Wars, but during that conflict, the CSWD was dismantled and Czerka abandoned Tatooine for good. Czerka's activities on Tatooine, however, paled before what it did to Kashyyyk. In 4020 BBY, 20 years before the outbreak of the Great Sith War, Czerka Corporation claimed to have discovered Kashyyyk, despite the fact that the planet had its own indigenous sentience, the Wookiees, and despite the fact that the Wookiees' planetary neighbours, the Trandoshans, had been part of the galactic community for the past 3,000 years. Nonetheless, as the Kashyyyk system and broader Mitaru sector were poorly explored at this point in time, Czerka was able to leverage the Republic to recognize its claim of discovery, and Kashyyyk became a Czerka world. The indigenous Wookiees had no say in this, as they were a low-tech civilization at this time, and Czerka was thus able to lobby the Republic to prevent the Wookiees from being recognized as fully sentient. The corporation went to great lengths to downplay the sophistication of Wookiee culture, even going so far as to refuse to refer to their homeland as Kashyyyk. Czerka had the planet officially named G5-623. After Czerka's operations on Kashyyyk expanded, and the corporation had achieved effective control over the Wookiee population, they had the planet renamed to Edion, a name chosen through a poll of Czerka stockholders. The Wookiees, at the time of Czerka's arrival on Kashyyyk, didn't have any large-scale industry or high technology, and they had not yet achieved spaceflight or left Kashyyyk. This was not the result of a lack of intelligence or means, but because Wookiee society was perfectly suited to the conditions of Kashyyyk as it was. It didn't need industry or anything like that. Even in later millennia, after the Wookiees took to the stars and developed many forms of high technology, many aspects of life on Kashyyyk were much lower tech than life on the core worlds, as the traditional Wookiee ways proved superior to those of outsiders for living in harmony with Kashyyyk. At the time of Czerka's arrival, the Wookiees did have some advanced technology, such as bowcasters, which were developed from technology salvaged from crashed starships. However, on the whole, the Wookiees had little technology and even less familiarity with outsiders, which ultimately made them easy for Czerka to take advantage of. Czerka's operations on Kashyyyk were a little different from those on most Czerka worlds. They didn't try to turn the planet into a strip mine or anything like that, nor did they use it as a commercial shipping hub. Czerka did perform survey work, extensive research into the planet's flora and fauna looking for profitable pharmaceutical resources, and some poaching down in the Shadowlands. But all of those activities came second to Czerka's main objective, the kidnapping of Wookiees to sell into slavery. The Wookiees' incredible natural strength and endurance, combined with their technological disadvantage, meant that slavers saw them as ideal targets, as their strength would make them desirable to buyers looking for manual laborers, while their technological disadvantage limited their ability to fight back. Thus, when Czerka set up shop on Kashyyyk, the first thing it did was establish slaving operations, kidnapping Wookiees and selling them all over the galaxy. To do this, they had the Wookiees classified as semi-sentient due to their physical inability to speak Basic, which allowed Czerka to skirt Republic anti-slavery laws, a rhetoric trick the Empire would later use for the same purpose. Czerka started out small on Kashyyyk, with the assistance of Trandoshian slavers, who had experience hunting Wookiees. They would send hunting parties into the Kashyyyk Shadowlands, where they would ambush Wookiee hunters when they were alone or in small groups. Steadily, Czerka began to get bolder, and they started seeking out smaller, isolated villages and enslaving their entire populations. They also began making deals with some of the more ambitious Wookiees, paying them to lure their fellow Wookiees right into Czerka's arms. One of these Wookiee traitors was Chundar, the son of Freya, chieftain of Ruk-Raro, one of the largest Wookiee villages, the future planetary capital of Kashyyyk. Chundar was the runt of his family, but he had more than enough political cunning to make up for it. In the late 3970s BBY, he drove his father into exile after spreading rumors that he was going mad, and in doing so he usurped the chieftainship. As the new chieftain of Ruk-Raro, Chundar made a deal with Czerka, allowing and even contributing to the taking of Wookiee slaves in exchange to shipments of weapons for him and his followers. Thanks to Chundar, Czerka's operations on Kashyyyk expanded considerably. Chundar gave Czerka's poachers free rein in the Shadowlands, allowed the corporation to build a spaceport and outpost near Ruk-Raro, and made regular deliveries of Wookiee slaves to Czerka, many of whom were enemies of Chundar that Czerka was perfectly happy to take off his hands. To maintain this tidy arrangement, all Czerka had to do was give Chundar weapons and help keep him in power. By the time of the Jedi Civil War, Czerka Corporation had sunk its filthy claws deep into Kashyyyk, and even as Czerka repression intensified, Wookiee resistance diminished, in large part thanks to the manipulations of Chundar. Fortunately, this whole web of oppression was unraveled in 3956 BBY. That year, the amnesiac Revan, fresh from saving a tribe of Sand people from Czerka's ethnic cleansing campaigns on Tatooine, showed up on Kashyyyk on a mission from the Jedi Council. He was accompanied by Zalbar, the younger brother of Chundar, who had been exiled from Kashyyyk thanks to Chundar's manipulations. Chundar hoped to take advantage of the Jedi by holding Zalbar hostage, promising to release him if Revan went to the Shadowlands and killed Freya, who had survived in exile all this time. With no choice, Revan initially accepted Chundar's mission, but instead of killing Freya, Revan helped him stage a coup. Revan, Zalbar and Freya slew Chundar and his lackeys. And once he was reinstated as chieftain, Freya called for a general uprising against Czerka. The Wookiees of Kashyyyk rallied to Freya's banner, rising up and slaughtering any Czerka personnel they could find. Freya's warriors stormed Czerka's outpost near Ruk-Raro, capturing the spaceport and decapitating Czerka's local branch. Following this defeat, Czerka Corporation pulled its surviving personnel off Kashyyyk and closed its operations there. Though to save face, it claimed it was simply scaling back operations in the Mitaruna sector and denied any rumors of a Wookiee uprising, though word got out anyway. The Jedi Civil War ended in defeat for the Sith Empire soon afterwards. The Sith fractured, fought a brief but brutal civil war, and then fled into the Outer Rim, and the Republic regained control of its former territory. But the Republic was greatly weakened by the conflict, and it existed in name only across much of the galaxy. This not only allowed Czerka to avoid consequences for its association with the Sith, but also made the corporation incredibly powerful in the years following the Jedi Civil War. It set up on worlds where Republic regulatory authority was all but non-existent, and it repeatedly lobbied the Senate to allow it to privatize government operations that it could potentially profit from. The Senate handed Czerka a ton of power in this period, as it was strapped for cash after the Jedi Civil War, and privatization allowed it to stop paying for certain operations. Of course, Czerka's profiteering meant that many of the government operations it privatized were quickly perverted or fell apart, as exemplified by the corporation's interference in the Telos restoration project. The TRP was the Republic's flagship infrastructure initiative of the post-Jedi Civil War period, an enormous terraforming project meant to restore life to Telos 4, which the Sith had bombed so heavily that the planet had become uninhabitable. The Republic hoped that restoring Telos would provide an economic boost and the necessary political capital to restore other dead worlds, which would greatly benefit galactic infrastructure in the long term. It staked pretty much everything on the TRP, using most of what was left in the Republic treasury to fund the construction of Citadel Station, an enormous orbital space station above Telos that was essential to the project. The Zabrak engineer, Bodor, oversaw the construction of a massive shield grid on Telos' surface to divide the planet into restoration zones, and the Senate then contracted an Ithorian herd led by Chodo Habat to do the actual terraforming work. The Ithorians' approach was based not just in science, but in their people's faith. Chodo Habat was a spiritual leader of his people, and as he saw it, the key to restoring Telos to life was reopening the planet to the Force. The Ithorians' methods worked. One by one, they brought life to the restoration zones, cleaning up the atmosphere in each zone and then importing flora and fauna from Onderon to populate them. The Ithorians' force-based approach to restoring Telos, which emphasized the interconnection of the living beings and ecosystems involved, helped them create stable ecologies within reach of the restoration zones, and slowly but surely, Telos started to come back to life. Then Czerka came along. The corporation first got involved in Telos by partly privatizing security for Citadel Station. As the enormous station expanded, it grew beyond the local Telos security force's ability to patrol, and so when Czerka offered to take over security for parts of the station, the Telosian Council happily agreed. Before long, 2/3 of Citadel Station was patrolled by the Czerka Security Division, or Czerka's mercenaries, the latter of whom especially were little more than deputized thugs. But this was only the beginning of Czerka's operations on Telos. The exchange in charge of Czerka's Citadel Station branch, the Myriulan Jarnu Lorso, was ambitious, cutthroat, and always in search of ever greater profits. She began to lobby the Telosian Council to grant Czerka Corporation control of some of the restoration zones on the surface, arguing that the Ithorians were sacrificing productivity, progress, and profit with their inefficient methods, which Lorso claimed were based in mysticism rather than in cold, hard science. As Czerka's power on Citadel Station grew, the Council granted the corporation control of a handful of restoration zones on the surface, beginning a bidding war between the Ithorians and Czerka for control of the whole planetary surface. Without the Ithorians to manage their ecology, the restoration zones under Czerka control quickly degraded. Czerka's administrators looked at the planet's plants and animals as individual assets or groups of assets rather than part of a broader, intimately interconnected ecosystem, and as a result, the biospheres of the Czerka-held zones fell out of balance. In several restoration zones, Czerka failed to control the populations of voracious Canucks imported from Duxon, which promptly ate all the other animals in their restoration zones. But Czerka didn't really care about this environmental chaos. So long as the restoration zone still became habitable, they didn't care whether the environment was thriving or just hanging on. Additionally, Czerka took advantage of its control of these restoration zones to make a quick profit by looting abandoned underground Republic military bases. For fear of trespassers, Czerka fortified its excavation sites with air defense towers and imported mercenary armies to the planet's surface, which killed all interlopers while Czerka personnel looted the abandoned facilities. Czerka raked in quite a bit of profit from reselling the Republic equipment it scavenged from these bases, so it began lobbying the Telosian Council to hand over more restoration zones. Soon, it began trying to get the Council to get rid of the Ithorians entirely and turn the whole restoration project over to Czerka. Czerka Corporation hoped that this would allow it to take control of all future restoration projects if the TRP eventually succeeded, in turn allowing it to loot the ruins of other planets and becoming even more outrageously wealthy. Of course, it was doubtful if the restoration project could ever succeed with Czerka in charge, given how the Czerka-held restoration zones had degraded. The Ithorians did their best to stop Czerka, but they lacked the wealth or political power to match the corporation, especially after Janu Lorso allied with the Citadel Station branch of the Exchange, a powerful crime syndicate. Bao Dor, the engineer who had designed the planet's shield grid, decided to take matters into his own hands, taking a shuttle to one of the Czerka-held restoration zones to go beat the piss out of whichever Czerka personnel he could find, but though this effort was admirable, it saw little success. Luck only turned back in the Ithorians' favour when Mitru Surik, the Jedi exile, arrived on Citadel Station. She allied with the Ithorians against Czerka, and on Chodo Habat's behalf, she prevented Czerka from stealing an infrastructure planning droid vital to the project, decapitated the local branch of the Exchange, and stole corporate records from Czerka's secure mainframe. These records proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Czerka, and particularly Janu Lorso, was involved in a boatload of highly illegal activity, and the Ithorians planned to present the files to the Telossian Council to convince them to tear up their contract with Czerka and ban the corporation from the Citadel Station and Telos' surface. In desperation, Janu Lorso dispatched an army of mercenaries to invade the Ithorian compound and slaughter Chodo Habat and his entire herd. Fortunately, Surik defeated the mercenaries, and the Ithorians were able to use the attack as a last damning piece of evidence against Czerka. After a lengthy series of hearings, the Telossian Council ultimately sided with the Ithorians against Czerka Corporation. Janu Lorso was disgraced, and the Telossian Council had that shooter and her ilk banned from Citadel Station, ending Czerka's meddling in the restoration project. Without Czerka weighing them down, the Ithorians got back to work, and under their care, Telos flourished once more. Czerka's expulsion from Telos was a turning point in the history of the company, the first time that it had been held legally accountable for its crimes. For the next 300 years, it remained powerful and wealthy, but it began experiencing setbacks, and more importantly, the Republic slowly began to take action against the corporation's abuses. Legal precedents set on Citadel Station led to similar actions against Czerka on other worlds, and the Republic Department of Adjudication began to investigate Czerka's operations. During the Galactic War between the Republic and the true Sith Empire, the Republic decided to act to stop Czerka's corruption and illicit practices, beginning with the seizure of Czerka outpost on the remote, windswept moon CZ-198. This facility was home to an enormous collection of illegal weapons, illicit experiments, and many of Czerka's darkest secrets, a vast collection of evidence that would completely damn the corporation if it fell into the Republic's hands. The Department of Adjudication moved to seize CZ-198, but the operation met with some complications. The Sith also caught wind of the operation and sent their own task force to steal some of Czerka's illegal weapons. While the Czerka personnel on CZ-198, under the leadership of Special Executive Rasmus Blees, fought back against both sides, vowing to defend the corporation's property from the Republic and the Sith alike. Their efforts were unsuccessful. Republic forces ultimately crushed both Czerka and the Sith, and the CZ-198 was seized by the Department of Adjudication. In the aftermath of the seizure, possibly facilitated by the sheer volume of evidence seized from CZ-198, the Republic moved to fully nationalize and liquidate the Czerka Corporation and prosecute many of its former executives, to the great satisfaction of many people in the galaxy. Czerka's monopolies and its strange hold on the galactic economy were broken up, and the pall of Czerka tyranny was lifted from countless worlds. But this wasn't the end of Czerka. Those among its morally bankrupt executives who escaped Republic law weren't willing to just throw in the towel. And in classic Czerka fashion, their response to the end of Czerka Corporation was to just make Czerka Corporation 2. They used their private wealth to found Czerka Interstellar, described by one of its operatives as a legally distinct entity which, by pure coincidence, is largely comprised of the former Czerka Corporation leadership and staff. Czerka Interstellar quickly moved to take over those Czerka operations the Republic hadn't already dismantled, and by the end of the Galactic Wars, it had taken Czerka Corporation's place in the galactic arms trade. With that said, Czerka was only ever able to regain a fraction of the wealth and power it had during the old Sith Wars, and Czerka Interstellar was a shadow of a once all-powerful galactic monopoly. Czerka lost its Senate representation and never got it back, And the same was true for Czerka's monopolies, most of its planetary holdings, and its stakes in a great many industries. In many respects, Czerka Interstellar had to start from scratch, and it never again rose to the status of the galaxy's most powerful mega-corruption. It never even came close. Sometime between the end of the Galactic Wars and the end of the New Sith Wars, Czerka Interstellar rebranded once again, becoming Czerka Arms. Czerka Arms' new name was reflective of its new business model. Rather than returning to the company's roots in mining or attempting to go back to being a monopoly with a stake in everything, Czerka focused on amassing a controlling share in the arms trade, which became its main industry. Czerka Corporation had first branched out into making and selling weapons before the Sith Wars, and at the company's height, it was one of the corporation's most profitable industries. The corporation's share in the arms trade was seemingly the only one Czerka Interstellar, and later Czerka Arms, ever fully reclaimed, and while Czerka Arms never again became one of the galaxy's leading megacorporations, it did become one of the leaders of weapons manufacturing. Specifically, Czerka Arms was the third largest arms dealer in the galaxy during the waning centuries of the Republic, after Blastech Industries and Mercen Munitions. Unlike Blastech and Mercen, however, Czerka's speciality wasn't blasters or explosives. Rather, Czerka's niche was non-standard weaponry. Czerka Arms did make some blasters, most notably the FS-1 far-shot sporting rifle and the 84-U hunting rifle, and it made grenades and such too. However, its blasters and munitions were often of a lower quality than those of its competitors, and the best Czerka Arms products tended to be those with more niche use cases. This included melee weapons, among them several varieties of force pikes, vibro blades, vibro knucklers, and vibro swords, and Czerka also made many different varieties of flamethrower, from full-on flame rifles and carbines to smaller flame projectors that could be mounted under the barrel of a rifle or used as an armor attachment. Boba Fett famously used a Czerka Arms ZX miniature flame projector as part of his kit, which he had attached to his left gauntlet. However, Czerka's most popular products, by a long shot, were slug throwers. Czerka completely dominated the slug thrower market, which was niche but profitable, as slug throwers were widely used on low-tech backwater worlds and in certain rugged environments, as they were much easier to maintain than blasters. All three of the galaxy's most popular slug thrower rifles were Czerka Arms products: the 6.2 AUG-2 hunting rifle, the Czerka Adventurer slug thrower rifle, and the Czerka Arms Outland rifle. Aurra Sing most famously used a Czerka Adventurer as a sniper rifle, while the 6.2 AUG-2 was very popular with frontier settlers on worlds like Tatooine, and the Outland rifle was used commonly in jungle environments, where more sophisticated equipment was hard to keep in working order. During the waning years of the Republic, Czerka Arms sold shipments of Outland rifles to the Kashyyyk for use in their wars against the Bithavarians and the Huk. General Grievous, before he was known by that name, inherited one of these rifles from his great-grandmother as a child, and it was his weapon of choice in his first campaigns during the Huk Wars. During the Great Peace of the Republic and the Clone Wars, Czerka Arms sold its products on the open market, but after the rise of the Galactic Empire, the company signed an exclusivity contract with the Empire, becoming a major supplier of the Imperial military. Of course, many of its products wound up on the open market anyway, either second-hand or through covert violations of Czerka's contract with the Empire. But for the most part, most of the weapons Czerka produced during the Imperial era went right into the Imperial military, which used them to inflict terror and suffering upon the people of the galaxy. For that reason, the Alliance to Restore the Republic listed Czerka Arms as a legitimate target for rebel privateers, which harassed Czerka shipping all throughout the Galactic Civil War. After the New Republic rose to power, Czerka Arms broke its contract with the Empire and began selling its products on the open market again, reclaiming its place as the third biggest open market arms dealer, though it did also make contracts with the New Republic to supply the New Republic's military. So, that was the story of Czerka Arms, once known as the Czerka Corporation, one of the most evil corporations in all of science fiction. From slavery and genocide to arming both the Sith Empire and the Galactic Empire, there were very few flavors of atrocity that Czerka hadn't carried out over its long and sordid history. But what do you think? Would you like us to take a look at any of the other megacorporations of the Star Wars universe? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments below.